Good morning, everyone. We're going to be talking about how to write an introductory paragraph and the concluding paragraph of our essay. Yesterday, we covered how to write one of the central ideas of our paragraph, and now I'm going to give you the other two parts of it. So, we want to think about what our thesis is and what's the purpose of a thesis. And so, if you're still not completely comfortable with what the idea of a thesis is, essentially what it is, it's the main idea of an essay that the writer is trying to prove to the reader. Okay, so it's the central purpose of the paper or of the essay that you're writing is the thesis. A thesis should be very clearly indicated, and it should say larger statements, or it should sort of tie into larger concepts and bigger ideas. So when someone's reading your introductory paragraph, the thesis should be very clearly stated. That it's essentially saying, if you're not exactly sure how to do it elegantly, you can even say, the purpose of my paper is, or the purpose of this essay is to convince you that blah, 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 blah. Okay? That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to say things like the most important, the most significant. You're trying to give emphasis to this idea that you are arguing. So this is my thesis statement. I've changed it a little bit because writing is all about doing revisions and changing things. And I know my old thesis statement was a little bit more wordy, so I tried to make it a little bit shorter. The most important decision Brian made during his time in the woods was making his small fish pound because it allowed him to no longer be worried about food and be able to focus on bigger problems. Okay? So this tells the reader that when they read my essay, I'm going to be talking about him making a fish pond. I'm going to say that it helped solve his food problem and allowed him to make bigger decisions later on. Okay, those are kind of my elements. Now, in my paper, I need to make sure that I'm doing those things now. So that means I need to talk about him making this fish pond. I need to talk about the fact that he no longer has to deal with food, and the fish pond solved his food problem. And I also need to talk about how he's able to make bigger decisions, or have more time to think about bigger decisions, because he doesn't have to worry about food. Okay, so I'm sort of telling the reader exactly what I'm going to write about. So I need to make sure I have evidence of that statement, and then really explain to my readers why I said that in the first place. Now, we've already talked about our central paragraphs, which are about the idea of proving my idea. But right now, I want to just organize it into how do I introduce the idea and how do I conclude the idea. So, the introduction, we've talked about this in writing classes before. You can think of it as an upside down pyramid. Okay, I'm starting with something broad and general, and I'm going to get more and more focused as I move in. The bottom of my pyramid is typically like my thesis. Okay, so more often than not, your introductory paragraph should start out broad with what the general idea is of Hatchet or the novel or survival. Sorry. And then as it gets closer and closer to the end of the introductory paragraph, I'm going to have my thesis. All right? So here's what mine looks like. This is my introduction paragraph. All right. The novel Hatchet is a story of a boy named Brian who finds himself trapped in the woods of northern Canada. He crash lands after a medical emergency which kills the only other person on the plane. Brian is in constant danger during the story and has to stay level-headed and purposeful to survive. The most important decision Brian made during his time in the woods was building a small fish enclosure near his shelter because it allowed him to no longer be worried about his food and be able to focus on the bigger problems like how he was going to get out of this mess. Right? So I changed my thesis statement a little bit more. I made it a little bit more elegant, and that's okay. You can change it a bunch of times, right? As long as you haven't changed the core concept of what your thesis is, you can do a lot of changing with the wording. All right, so breaking this down, my topic sentence is I introduced the idea that there's a boy named Brian who's trapped in the woods. It's about a novel. Okay, the pink is my actual thesis. And if we look at a concluding paragraph is a mirror of your introductory paragraph. It's like the opposite side. It's yin and yang. Okay? So If my introductory paragraph starts out broad and gets more and more narrow to my thesis, my concluding paragraph is going to do the exact opposite of that. I'm going to state my thesis, and I'm going to go broad again. So that's what this should look like. The most important decision Brian made during his time in the woods was building a small fish enclosure near his shelter, because it allowed him to no longer be worried about food and be able to focus on the bigger problems, like how he was going to get out of this mess. Brian's successful rescue. So now I'm jumping to the end of the story, actually, because chronologically it kind of makes sense. I don't need to talk about how Brian was missing or was gone or was unsafe in the woods, because that's done already. I've already talked about that. Brian's successful rescue was able to happen because he was able to conquer bigger problems, like getting back into the plane to find the emergency supplies. Brian's forethought and level-headedness made him survive in the woods and go home at the end of the story. Hopefully anyone reading this can learn a thing or two from all of this. It's not an excellent concluding paragraph, but it still restates my thesis, and then it goes more and more general as I move away from the thesis. Right? So it's really important to get that idea of the upside down pyramid or inverse pyramid and then a pyramid. Okay? You're trying to go from general to specific, specific to general. Okay? Now everything in between, that's the meat of my concept. If I just have an introductory paragraph and a concluding paragraph, that's not a full essay, because I haven't actually proved anything. I can say it as much as I want. I could say whatever I want. I could say Brian's the smartest person ever to live. And then I could say that my concluding paragraph, see, Brian's obviously the smartest person that ever lived. Thank you for listening to my essay. I haven't actually proved anything. I haven't given any evidence from anywhere that says Brian's actually intelligent. I can't just say it. I have to actually prove it. Okay, so your guys' job now is your body paragraphs. That's what it's called. I keep forgetting what the word was. The body paragraphs are essentially the meat and potatoes of all of my essay. That's where I'm proving my ideas. That's where I'm arguing my points. I'm trying to give as much evidence as possible. The introduction and the conclusion are not the places for me to provide evidence. The introduction and conclusion are for me to say, listen, this is what you're about to read, or this is what you did read. Okay, sort of repeating myself and making sure that the reader understands at the end of the story, okay, or at the end of my essay, this is what this person was trying to prove to me. And now the question is whether I did or did not. Doesn't come down into the introduction and conclusion. It comes down into the meat and potatoes, which is my body paragraphs, which is what we talked about yesterday. Okay, if you have questions, please send me a message on Teams. If you're not feeling confident right now on completing this essay, please send me a message on Teams. I don't want to have messages on Friday afternoon saying, "Oh, Mr. Coke, it's not going very well." Send me messages now. Okay, I hope you have a good day.